a free visa regime for all Africans. Africans traveling to Ghana will receive their e-visas online free of charge.
All right, welcome to This Week in Ghana, your weekly or bi-weekly live stream where we talk about all things Ghana related and Ghana news. Today, we are going through a number of different stories, including the free visas for all Africans to enter the country of Ghana. We're also going to talk about the lift of the tomato ban from Burkina Faso. We will discuss oil alternatives and fuel alternatives for Ghana due to the current global fuel shortage. And we will also be talking about the real estate conference that's coming up later this month. But before we get into each of the stories, we'd like to start with introductions. So I'll turn it over to Ivy before I introduce myself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivy Prosper, and I tell stories from Africa and the African diaspora. I have a YouTube channel, which is my name, Ivy Prosper. I also am the founder of my own company, which is Prosper Creative Group, telling stories from Africa, doing consultations and curating travel experiences and documentary production. So this is, as he said, our bi-weekly conversation with news on Ghana. If you're ever looking for any information from me, I also do real estate marketing of things available in Ghana. You can email me info@ivyprosper.com. Follow me on all social platforms. It's Ivy Prosper.
All right, and I'm Joe Hatagwa, founder of Authentic African. Authentic African Media. We help people visit, move, and invest on the continent of Africa. We also share stories about the continent and the diaspora. And our goal is to build a better world for people of all African descendants all around the world. So, and helping Africa get back to its rightful place on the world stage, economic prosperity, and development. So with that, we do these live streams to tell people more about the world that they are looking at, potentially moving, visiting, or investing in. And so in this case, we are going to be talking about Ghana. And so we're always going to be looking at it through the lens of those who are planning to do one of those three things, so that you can keep these things in mind when you are making your decision about one of those three things. All right. So with that, we will get back to this story. So as you can see, the president of Ghana, Mahama, actually mentioned that there will be an online visa process, and it will be free of charge, but not visa free. I know that all the articles, even the live stream that I posted and title says visa free. And so the difference between visa free and free visa, meaning you still need to have a visa, you just don't have to pay for it. Whereas previously other countries don't require you to have a visa if you're from an African country to enter their country. So that is one of the major differences. So we're going to play some more from this video, get some more commentary, and then we'll have some more commentary on the other side.
Excuse me.
Announced that effective
Sorry, guys.
25th May 2026, when we commemorate Africa Day.
Hey. So for those of you confused with what is going on here, it turns out from 25th May, which is Africa Day, Ghana will be entering a free visa regime for all African nations. And I think the part that is being left out of the whole thing is applying online for e-visa. Some people are not reading everything. They are just looking at the headline. This is why sometimes I stay away from political party. And second of all, they cloud your judgment on anything. When you see something good happening, you can't say it because it's not your party. If it's bad to you, can't say it because it's your party. And before you pick up your political guns to come and shoot in the comment section, let me make this clear. This was signed under the previous government, and it's only been implemented now.
You get it?
So both of them have their hands in the whole thing. Now let's break the whole thing down. It turns out about 60% of people are not supporting the whole thing from what I've seen online. For me, like this is 50-50. And I'll tell you the reason why along the way. So the whole thing is, even though it's free visa for people, it doesn't mean that anybody can just wake up and come to Ghana. No, you go through the online process, which is the e-visa. But then the only difference over here is that this one will be free. You won't pay any money, you understand, before coming here. There are some countries that they already come to Ghana freely, like Zimbabwe. That one is different from this one. The aim of the whole thing is to boost tourism, trade and investment and entrepreneurship. Now, the concerns that people are raising online, the first one is security. Do we have a security framework to apply this thing in Ghana? Which for me, it is true. You can't overlook this thing. It happened for Africa. Some people will come here and they'll cause problem. But then
okay, so I thought that was an interesting take. You know, and you know, I think that there's a couple things there that was stated, and I think, you know, obviously it makes sense to call that out. So for some countries to enter Ghana, you don't need a visa at all. That would include anyone who has a passport from all of West Africa, right? If you are from an ECOWAS country, you can enter Ghana with no visa. So I enter Ghana with no visa with my Sierra Leone passport, right? I come in and out of Ghana. I can stay longer in Ghana than someone else who doesn't have an ECOWAS passport. Actually, we can stay the same amount of time, but I have a lesser penalty if I overstay the time frame that is given. So there are other countries that already can enter Ghana without a visa. Now, what they're talking about here is a free visa, but you have to do the process through the e-visa process. Ivy, do you have any thoughts on this and even what he was stating in terms of security? I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear from you first, and then I'll maybe add my 2 cents afterwards.
Well, I don't think that having a free visa program is going to change the security level. They're still going to use the same process to apply, because you still have to fill out the application. You still have to apply that you're coming from your country. You still have to present your, valid identification. So all of those checks are still done. The only difference is that this time they're not paying the fee that they would have been having to pay before.
Yep.
That's the difference. So they still apply, but but then they just don't pay.
Yeah, and I think that's hugely important, because I heard that statement and I thought to myself, it's not. I think if it was visa-free travel and you didn't have to get a visa, there is no checking and there's no requirements to enter any information. You just enter the country. I mean, you still enter the country. They still, put your name in the database, but you still have to apply for a visa. The application still applies. So, I think that concern that people have been talking about, and I've heard that from this gentleman and other folks as well. I think it does. I think it's negated by the fact that you still have to apply for the visa. Mm-hmm. And look, I think many of the countries where there are concerns generally don't require a visa to enter, right? If you talk to Ghanaians on the ground, they'll tell you there are some countries nearby where they feel some of the challenges with crime are coming from. And look, those as long as you have a valid passport from those countries, you can enter into Ghana without a visa. The way I see it, though, is that honestly, it is, we need more flowing of people between countries. And I think a visa itself is a barrier, but if you add a price on top of the visa, that's another barrier, right? You're just adding more barriers, and it just makes people not as willing to want to do something. Sometimes it's an annoyance. Sometimes it's just a barrier to even want to come into the country. And so, ideally, we move away from a free visa to just more intercontinental travel. And the reason why I say that is because there are other groups of countries that are connected as a continent where they have free flow of travel between them. In all of Europe, they do not have visa restrictions. It's not a visa that's free. It's not a visa at all. If you have any one of the European Union passports, and you might notice that when you're going into Ghana, or going into Europe, actually, when you go into Europe, I always forget where I see these. You'll see one that says you have a American passport or a European Union passport, or everyone else, right? Or something like that, European Union or everyone else. And so they all move around in and out of their country so easily without any visas. And in fact, as an American with my American passport, I can go to Europe, every country in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, without a visa.
Yeah, it's the same with the Canadian passport. The majority of Europe, you can just go from country to country. I remember when I went to Europe, it was the same from Greece. I just went from Greece to Italy, to Spain, to France. It was easy. There was no checking of if you have a visa, because we didn't need visas to go there with a Canadian passport.
Yeah. And then, of course, I have more privilege in Africa with my American passport outside of the ECOWAS than I do with my Sierra Leonean passport, which I think is a huge challenge, right? So what do I mean by that? I went to Egypt. I did visa on arrival, $25, paid for my visa, went right into the country, maybe 20 minutes. Tanzania, it was about an hour. It was an inconvenience because I didn't do it online beforehand, but they had a visa on arrival program. Both of those countries did not have visa on arrival programs for Sierra Leone. If I was solely a Sierra Leone citizen, I would have had to go to their embassy or consulate in Sierra Leone, apply for a visa, get approved for a visa to go to that country, which is on the same continent. Whereas with my American passport, I can just go. That is a huge problem in Africa. And that is really what, I think we talked a few weeks back about the misunderstanding between, was it Namibia and Ghana with what Muhammad was wearing, the mock?
Yes. Yes.
and I think the reason for that is because there's no free flow of people between different countries. Because had those people, few of them had gone to Ghana, it wouldn't even been a question. It would have just been known. The fact that there was they're unaware. I think a lot has to do with the unfortunately, there's no free flow of movement across the continent like there are in other places. People in the UK know a lot about people in France who know a lot about people in Germany because they all go between each country all the time. In fact, people are multilingual there, and they learn to speak other languages on the continent of Europe because of that. And so, not to look to Europe as the beacon in the sky or the shining star, but it's just, if they have that process, why don't we? Anything to add on the visa process and the visa?
No, nothing to add, but people should know that I think Ghana currently has more than 20 countries that don't need a visa to travel to Ghana. And this is outside of, this particular thing that's happened right now. Countries like, for example, people who have Jamaican passports, Trinidad and Tobago passports, like there's certain countries that if you have a passport from those countries, you do not need a visa to enter Ghana. You would simply just board and arrive. And these are agreements that they have like between the two countries. For example, in Jamaica, the same, Ghanaians can go to Jamaica visa free. So there are certain countries, so you can check to see your home country if it is on the list of places that don't need a visa to come to Ghana. But the challenge with some of those countries is because there aren't direct flights, you might need a transit visa through the country that you have to transit through.
Right. Another problem. Another problem. Yeah, I mean, PLO Lumumba, Professor Lumumba speaks about this a lot. He's had a bunch of viral moments talking about this. And, there are a couple of countries that made travel to their country visa free. So if I'm not mistaken, Benin is on that list. Gambia is on that list. Kenya did it, I think, last year, if I'm not mistaken. There's about 5 or 6 countries that have made it so that all Africans can travel to their country without a visa. And we'd like to see it across all 54 countries, or whatever you want to say, 55 countries, depending on if you recognize the Western Sahara or Somaliland. So yeah, I think I would love to see that. I mean, I think it'd be a game changer for everyone. I mean, it was shocking to me that I went to this conference for Jumia. It was a sales conference. We were all going to Egypt, and 2 people were denied visas to go to Egypt. From what I understand, neither one of them had a criminal record. It was just because of the countries they were coming from. One was coming from Nigeria. And, you know, let me just kind of walk you guys through what he had to go through, just for context. He lives in Lagos. The Egyptian embassy is in Abuja. So, you know, I think it's a couple-hour flight away. So he flew. The person was not there for the meeting that day. The person did not show up. He was supposed to meet with from the Egyptian embassy. So he went back home to Lagos. He flew back again, and he was denied a visa for the interview process, although we were going for a sales conference for the company we work for. You know, it makes all kinds of challenges if you want to travel somewhere within the next couple of days, where you have to go through this process of getting a visa, hearing back from an embassy. If you guys have all dealt with these embassies, you know what I mean. It takes some time for them to really, you know, go through their processes. So in any case, happy to see this. I'd like to see it go one step further. I know some people disagree with that, especially those who are living in country, which I understand everyone wants to protect their culture and protect their, you know, their countries from potential for crime. I do think that it's a net positive, though, if people can, the free flow of movement across the continent of Africa, in my opinion. Okay, moving on to the next story. So sticking with travel, the Ministry of Transport has introduced an airport infrastructure development charge, describing it as a strategic step to modernize Ghana's airports and position the country as a leading aviation hub in Africa. It's supposed to take effect, or has taken effect, as of April 1st of this year, and they're imposing a $100 intercontinental traveler's charge and a Ghana cedi 100 Ghana cedi charge for domestic travel. So meaning 100 Ghana cedis to go from Accra to Kumasi, for example, on a flight. And if you're flying into Ghana, I guess, or out of Ghana, it's $100 added to the price, into the fees. So we're going to watch this video and we will have some commentary on the other side.
Combined with the Air Navigation Services Complex, these investments have provided a high-tech foundation airlines need to operate safely. However, sustainable growth requires us to be honest about the hurdles ahead. As of 1st February 2026, a new API PNR fee of $18 on a return ticket was introduced. Furthermore, we are deeply concerned by the upcoming AIDC charge of $100 on return tickets scheduled for 1st of April 2026. Bearing in mind that more than 70% of our traffic is both in and outbound. These new fees will bring the total international departure charges to $173 for one-way tickets and $243 for return, catapulting Ghana to top 10 most expensive countries globally for passenger charges. In Africa, Ghana is set to leapfrog from 9th to 3rd place, trailing only Gabon and Sierra Leone.
Trailing only Gabon and Sierra Leone. I understand these fees flying into Sierra Leone. But let's talk about Ghana, because that's what we're here to talk about. So, by the way, I feel like I detected a Kenyan accent. But in any case, it's still important to, so I mean, maybe speaking from someone who's traveling in and out of the country. So your thoughts on this, the fees, the additional fees?
I mean, I think that it's I don't know what to say, because there's already people, when it comes to tourism, that complain about the country being extremely expensive. I've been reading that some of the money raised from this additional fee is with plans to support fixing up some of the infrastructure of the older airport, which is being used for domestic flights. I read somewhere that some of the money would go towards upkeep and maintenance of the airport facilities. So I know a lot of people will be very upset, because flights are already really high coming into the country. Airlines, I know, immediately started adjusting their flights to Ghana, which is it's an unfortunate situation that they're finding ways to justify it. I think it's interesting because I didn't know that Gabon and Sierra Leone were more expensive as far as the airport charges until she said that in her statement. So that took me by surprise to know that. And now Ghana's number 3, she said. It jumps up to the 3rd most expensive. So that alone makes it difficult for people already making their travel plans. But keep it in mind, if you do want to come, that these are some of the things you're going to have to budget into your plans. Some people will say it's only $100, but $100 makes a big difference for someone whose budget is something, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, that's 2 days at an Airbnb, depending on where you're staying. That's, you know, food for the entire stay. So, and so for some people, depending on where they're buying food, well, not for the entire stay, but for like a week or for a couple of days. So, yeah, I mean, look, I've gone through this in Sierra Leone already. There were a number of different charges added because they built a new airport, and those fees were also $100 or $100+, and they broke out the fees. What you'll see is when you're booking a flight, I don't know how many people do this, but it'll tell you the cost of the flight, and then you see the surcharges and the taxes. One of the biggest complaints for many of us who fly in and out of Sierra Leone, very similar to what you're going to hear in Ghana, is you'll see the price of the ticket, and then you'll see the surcharges that are almost the same price as the ticket, right? So the ticket's $400, but it's really $800 because the surcharges and extra taxes and fees add another $400 on the ticket. That is always the challenge. One of the things that I really liked about Ghana previously was that what I would do is I would fly into Sierra Leone, fly from Sierra Leone to Ghana, then fly from Ghana back to the United States because it was always a little bit cheaper. And they also had direct flights, right? So if I took a one stopover, it'd be cheaper. The direct flights are close to the same price, even though when you're flying in and out of Sierra Leone, you have to make a stop somewhere else. It's now looking like they are going to be right on par with each other. It's just going to be more expensive. When it comes to these kinds of things, one of the things that is always hoped for is that the improvements that are going to be made based on these expenditures will be felt by those who are going through the process of traveling. That's always the hope for. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that will be the case. It sounds like they're talking about improvements. I don't know if I've seen that list of improvements as of yet. I was just trying to figure out from Business Insider reported on this, and they mentioned, the challenges, but I didn't see here any of the specific improvements that they were planning to make. So, regional connectivity, they said. So they said the increase also runs counter to the efforts by the economic community of West African states to cut air transport taxes by 25% to improve regional connectivity. Taxes and charges already account for up to half the ticket prices in West Africa, according to industry data. I mean, I didn't even read this article before I said what I said previously, but that is true. Across Africa, the impact is particularly acute. For passengers, the effect is immediate, higher fares. For policymakers, the challenge remains balancing the need to fund infrastructure while making air travel more affordable in a region where connectivity is already limited. So we'll keep you guys posted as we hear more about what exactly these changes are, or these charges are meant to affect and change. As of right now, I don't think we have too many details from the reporting that I've seen so far.
So I see a comment from Jada, who says that Sierra Leone doesn't own their airport. I don't know anything about that. And then she says, I wonder who's going to be remodeling the airport in Ghana. I don't know who's going to be doing the remodeling, but I know that in Ghana, the airport is owned by the Ghana Airports Company Limited, which is under the Ministry of Transportation in Ghana. So it is a state-owned airport. So, but I don't know who's going to be doing the development.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just, I know I brought Sierra Leone into the conversation because I kind of always do, but just really quickly, as it pertains to Sierra Leone, it was outsourced to a Turkish company that, if I'm not mistaken, did the Istanbul airport. And I've been through that Istanbul airport. It is very nice. One of the nicest airports I've ever been to. And to be honest, the new airport in Sierra Leone, although small and right next to the old airport, is a very nice airport, but they've now passed on all the costs to the passengers to pay for the fact that they basically did it on loan. But it was necessary. It was absolutely necessary to get that airport done. There's a question on Ghana Airways. I don't know if you know anything on what's been going on with Ghana Airways. Is there any updates there, or we can skip that?
You said the updates on what?
Ghana Airways. Somebody specifically asked about Ghana Airways since we're on the topic of airports. I didn't know if there was any updates there. I don't know any updates there.
I mean, there's always updates. Every month there's somebody saying that the Ghana Airways is going to be rebooted. I keep hearing this for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. There's always announcements that the Ghana Airways is coming back, but I don't know if it's. I always keep saying I'll believe it when I see it, because I swear for the last, I'll say consistently since 2019, I hear a lot. So not 10 years, about 7 years, 6, 7 years, I keep hearing. And then one company I hear a lot is Gold Star, that talks a lot about reviving Ghana Airways. So I'll believe it when I see it.
Fair to say. Now, the Ministry of Transport had justified the introduction of fees, describing it as a strategic step to modernize Ghana's airports and position the country as a leading aviation hub in Africa. Maybe we can hear from him a little bit to see if there is anything that calls out the specifics of what this is meant to improve and modernize before we move on to the next story, because I did mention earlier I wasn't sure what this was meant to improve or modernize. So let's give them an opportunity to explain.
And all over the sub-region, our airports are in very deplorable states. Let me tell you that from 2012, Ghana Airport Company did not make any comprehensive levies or charges to upgrade our airport. Our sewage treatment plant is 25 years old, almost full to the capacity. If we do not do something about that sewage treatment plant, one day we will see a reversal of whatever waste we put inside. And as a country that wants to be the hub to aviation, we need to address it. Every day when you pass at the airport peak hours, sometimes I go there to help in the management of traffic. Our car park is too small to the point that the cars overflow to the streets and create a lot of traffic congestion. We need a new car park in the airport. Other airports, you have short stay, assuming you have a connecting flight that will take you 3-4 hours and you needed some rest. There should be some hotel facilities. So the car park will come with the hotel facilities attached to it so that it will create some comfort for our travelers. Now, the biggest one is the connecting concourse between Terminal 2 and Terminal 3. We all agree that Terminal 2 lies idle and not being used. So Excellency, the President said, look, we have to be innovative and then get that Terminal 2 functional. So we agreed and started to rehabilitate, to remodel Terminal 2 to be able to serve both international and domestic. Now, passengers, if they are going to travel international, meaning that they have to get out either from Terminal 3, out of the airport and come in, or they have to use bus to carry or convey passengers to the Terminal 2, which doesn't fit in the design.
Okay. Those are some interesting points being made there about the Minister of Transportation. I will say a couple places I've been in Ethiopia, and a few other places where I have seen the exact model that he's talking about, where there's an airport on the grounds of, there's a hotel on the grounds of the airport, and that all the parking is part of the structure. And so, yeah, I mean, many other countries, you have hotels near the airport, but this is saying there would be a hotel, I guess I would presume, owned and operated by the same company that owns the airport to build out a hotel on the premises, which I think would be very useful for people who have layovers, delays, etc. Well, yeah, so I think that's actually a really good point, and it makes sense. The question is how much it will cost and how long it would take to build. And of course, you know, the car park too. I one of the challenges I feel when I land at that airport is, you know, my Uber drivers are always like, oh, I had to go pay the 10 Ghana cedis to park here, and you know, I don't want to park outside. You know, it's just, and the car park is small. It's almost always full to the capacity when you land. You know, you land at what is now Accra International Airport. I almost wanted to call it Kotaka again. When you land at Accra International Airport, you do notice that, I mean, every single spot, the A, B, C, D, and then all those rows back, you notice that like each spot is full. And there's been a few times where I've been trying to locate my driver, but my driver passes me and keeps driving, is going to find somewhere to park so that I can go find them to get in the vehicle. It is a little bit cumbersome. It is not, I mean, that big of a deal, but it does add to the delays in getting to your destination. Whereas at certain other airports around the world where they have bigger car parks, they have areas for ride pickup, right? You go to the area for ride pickup. It's big enough for everybody who's going there for the ride pickup, and it's explicitly for that group. And so ideally, you know, the airport has a parking structure that allows for that. So, I mean, those are some interesting and good justifications, I would say. And your thoughts, though, Ivy, on the.
I think it's a good idea to have have a better parking situation there. I think what ideally, and I've said this in the past, that a multi-level parking structure where there's levels, and it's not just the flat parking lot that they have. It should be multiple levels, so you can fit more in the smaller space. I think that's what's the best thing to do. Mm-hmm. And there's developments happening around the airport. I'm so surprised that the airport didn't get in on, I don't know who owns the land, but that land is being built into premium apartments now. There's going to be apartment buildings in the area right across the street from the airport. It would have been ideal if that's where the airport hotels would have been, if that was a part of the plan that he's talking about. But there's already private companies that are building these, premium apartments that will be there. So I don't know if maybe they'll try to strike up some kind of deal with them and purchase some of the units for the purpose of people who have short stays because their flight might have a long layover or something, or they're transferring. And I think what would be good, if they're talking about this money going towards infrastructure, what would be good is if there was some kind of transportation shuttle or something from the international airport to the domestic side, because they're going to do a hybrid on that new side is the plan, because it's not used that much. It's used for the domestic flights. So when you're going to, like you said earlier, Kumasi, when you're going to Tamale, Takoradi, that's where you fly from. And it's a pain. Let's say if somebody lands at the main airport and now you have to find your way to get to the other side. So having some kind of shuttles available to move people there would be effective to help people with carrying their luggage and stuff. So, I mean, I was recently at the airport in Buffalo, New York, and they have this little train. Mm-hmm. Is it Buffalo? No, Detroit. Detroit, transferred in Detroit from Raleigh to Detroit to Buffalo. And in Detroit, they have this train that moves from one section to the other to give people the opportunity to move with all their luggage. If it's going to be a long walk, you don't want to be walking with all that luggage. So stuff like that to make it helpful for the people, like something that's going to show that they've actually put the money to use. We don't want it to be a situation where you've added this fee and then people aren't getting anything for the fee. That would be a travesty if that happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another great point, just even in terms of moving from one terminal to the other, because to your point, as the minister said there, people have to take some kind of bus. I think back to like Brussels, Brussels airport, it's big, they don't have a tram or train service, but you have to take a bus. They have these buses that leave from one space to another. You have to walk to a certain area in a gate. Then you go down the steps, you get on that bus, and its job is just to go directly to other terminals. Same thing here. You know, I fly in and out of JFK frequently, as you guys can imagine, domestic or international travel. And when I do, you know, many times my baggage is in a completely separate terminal to where I land, or the where I fly to. Where I get my ground transportation, right? The ride shared pickup is at a whole nother station, and it is, you know, a 25-minute or so tram ride from one to the other. So, you know, ideally there is, you know, easy movement between the two, and, you know, we kind of upgrade to the standard that you see in other places. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So to your point, let's just hope that funding goes to it and it gets done sooner than later. I'd be interested to hear how much the cost overall. I think I had mentioned that earlier. Okay, so now from transportation to horticulture, farming, you know, we reported on this some weeks ago that Burkina Faso had basically put a ban on tomato exports just in general. And recently, Burkina Faso's decision was to lift the suspension on fresh tomato exports, which, you know, a move that, you know, is expected to ease the supply pressures, stabilize prices, and support the country's efforts to strengthen the domestic tomato value chain. And it seems like, you know, Ghanaians are welcoming this move, of course. As you might remember, the last time we discussed this, there was a market woman who was, you know, very upset, visibly upset, explaining how this was going to be devastating for her business. And so it's good to hear that it is back. So we're going to watch this video and have some commentary on the other side.
Burkina Faso has lifted the suspension it placed on fresh tomato exports to countries including Ghana, a decision expected to ease supply constraints and bring stability to local markets. Ghanaian authorities welcomed the announcement after the March 19, 2026 ban triggered shortages, pushed up prices, and created challenges for consumers and local processors. DW's Maxwell Sook is in Tamale, where traders have been reacting.
Burkina Faso's export ban in place for several weeks had severe consequences for tomato traders in northern Ghana. Authorities in Ouagadougou said the suspension was aimed at boosting domestic agro-processing by ensuring enough raw materials for local factories. Every dry season, Burkina Faso supplies Ghana with fresh tomatoes, but insecurity continues to threaten this lifeline. In February, several Ghanaian traders were attacked by jihadis, leaving many in fear. Market women in Tamale say they are relieved by Burkina Faso's decision.
We were always idle when the ban was there. When you come out here, there will be nothing to do. And feeding our children was a problem.
There was a huge shortage. Because of that, we suffered. The trucks weren't moving again.
All right, I'll leave it there. I think we've heard a little bit from the traders and what the life was like for them during this ban. So I imagine it's a huge relief. And it comes back to the conversation we had previously that, you know, domestic production needs to come back to Ghana, right? You had mentioned, I think, in the last discussion about this, that Kwame Nkrumah had factories and there was a pride in domestic cultivation of tomatoes. But yeah, your thoughts on the ban being lifted and the ban being lifted.
I think that, in the immediate time frame, it's helpful for the people who are greatly affected, the business people, the women, talking about, you know, how they were idle during the time that the ban was happening. And when I heard her say that they were idle, it just made me sad, because I thought, you know, they could be doing something else. They could have been exploring, how can we start now teaching ourselves or learning how to do this without relying on the imports from Burkina Faso. And I know that the ban ended quickly, but I think people should keep what happened in their minds, and they should start using this as an opportunity to start exploring agriculture right in the country and starting to plant their own tomatoes, so that in the next harvest season they have something, so that they're not so reliant on importing it from somewhere else, because it could happen again. They could decide again that they're going to actually ban, and they're not going to lift it for a long time. And then what? You know, it's important that this is a lesson, and it's a lesson that people should use as a teaching moment to start planting their own tomatoes. You know, the whole country relies on tomatoes. It's a base in many of the stews that people make in Ghana. Why is it that it's being imported when it could actually be grown in the country? And I understand countries around the world import things from each other all the time, because sometimes something from one country tastes different than from another. Tomatoes grown in, you know, Canada might taste then different than tomatoes grown in Mexico or grown in, you know, Burkina Faso, like different tastes. But ultimately, being self-sufficient is so important. And that's why I think that they should really start exploring farming it themselves.
Absolutely. And the irony in this is that in the last 2 years, Burkina Faso actually received a major consignment of hydro agricultural equipment that arrived through the port of Tema in Ghana, valued at over 13 billion CFA francs, approximately $21 million. The machinery was purchased by Burkina Faso state budget to support the country's agro-pastoral offensive, a food self-sufficiency goal. So imagine Ghana does not have the level of farming with tomatoes that it should to be able to supply to its own country. However, sold $21 million worth of equipment to Burkina Faso for that exact same thing. And so, you know, and then of course they're buying tomatoes from Burkina Faso, right? So I you know, there should probably be some reworking and restructuring of that process.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I also think this is an opportunity. Many people from the diaspora who are always talking about business opportunities, things that they want to do when they come. If you are interested in agriculture, this is something that you can look into, because it is possible, and it means not coming and living in Accra, because I know a lot of people want to come and stay in Accra, but if you want to do something like this, going to the more rural areas where there's a lot of land to be able to farm with. So look into that as a potential business opportunity. People sometimes become millionaires from agriculture. So it's something you can look at. Then it's you're not only helping the people in the country, but you're also building a business that could potentially become a business empire of tomatoes. So I think that this is something that somebody in the diaspora, if you're interested in agriculture, you should seriously look into doing this.
Absolutely. And I'll also add that, you know, I had a friend of mine who, because she worked for an NGO for about 2 years, doing marketing for the company that did things and having to do with farming, she was able to find contracts all over Africa.
Wow.
Because of all of these people who were investing in farming in all the different countries. And so she was living in Ghana, but she had contracts in other countries. Sometimes they'd fly her out. Other times they just paid her to do whatever she was doing from the comfort of her home in Ghana. So, you know, even for those of you who may not be entrepreneurial minded, but you're into cultivation of, you know, farming, etc., it may be worth it to look into employment as well on the continent in this particular arena, because I do think that it's going to be one that's going to continue to grow. You know, as other countries who have scarcity of food on ground and don't have the ability to grow it will need to be able to import it from the continent. Now, moving on from agriculture to fuel prices, you know, Ghana is looking to the Dangote refinery. Dangote. Everybody always corrects me on how to pronounce his name. On the Dangote refinery in Nigeria as fuel prices rise. So there's a deal being considered right now, exploring the possible fuel supply deal with Nigeria's Dangote refinery as the country looks for ways to manage rising fuel prices and reduce pressure on consumers. According to President Mahama, the move comes at a time when global oil prices are increasing, pushing up the cost for petrol and diesel locally. He made some remarks last Monday during the presidential dialogue with the civil society organizations at the Jubilee House. He did mention that the government is therefore considering an alternative supply options that could offer more stable and possibly cheaper fuel. If you guys aren't aware, the Dangote refinery is located in Lagos and is one of the largest refineries in Africa with the capacity to process over around 650,000 barrels of crude oil per day. It was built to reduce Africa's dependence on imported refined petroleum products. So we will play a video and have some commentary on the other side. There we go.
Good afternoon. The government says it is considering a range of decisive measures in the coming days to ease the burden of rising fuel prices on Ghanaians if the war involving Israel, the United States, and Iran persists in the weeks ahead. Among the measures under review are adjustments to fuel price margins to cushion consumers, as well as a reassessment of the 1 cedi fuel levy. Speaking during a presidential dialogue with civil society organizations, Jubilee House President Mahama indicated there is also an option of signing a memorandum of understanding with the Dangote refinery to secure a stable supply of petroleum products. Presidential Affairs correspondent Maxwell Akbaba reports from the Jubilee House.
Dialogue with civil society follows similar engagement with the private sector and organized labor. According to the presidency, the session was intended to provide an open, constructive, and forward-looking platform for engagement between government and civil society groups. President Mahama commended Joy News' investigative documentary Tax for Galamsey, describing it as a timely expose that uncovered a long-standing practice in which some district assemblies boost internally generated revenue by taxing champagne machines and other mining equipment.
All right. So your thoughts, Ivy, on the potential of moving towards, a close neighbor to Nigeria, not exactly a neighbor, but nearby country, to get fuel as opposed to other parts of the world?
I mean, I think it's a great idea because you're looking to another West African nation for support when your needs are falling short. But it also exposes the fact that I know that Ghana has found oil as well, but I think Ghana only gets 2% of the oil. I may be wrong. I'm just trying to remember what I read many years ago, that a lot of the oil in Ghana is not actually refined here,
right?
From my understanding. So if we had been refining more oil here and had our own oil in Ghana, that it would be possible to use your own oil. But at the same time, I think that it's great to look at Nigeria as an alternative rather than looking, to another country off of the continent. I think it's a good idea.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to some other alternatives that are already happening as we speak. So we'll speak to that. But yeah, so to your point, Ghana has estimated between 5 billion and 7 billion barrels of proven oil reserves underground. But despite these significant resources, the country has historically exported almost all of the raw crude and imported refined fuel due to the gap in local refining capacity. This is a challenge you see a lot on the continent. So they call it, what they call it is the refining paradox, where it produces more crude oil than consumed, but it imports up to 80% of the refined fuel. So there's actually an oil refinery in Tema, which I was not aware of. It's state-owned. It was originally built to process heavier crude, but it lacks specific units like diesel hydrotreater needed to refine what they call light sweet crude produced from Ghana's Jubilee and TEN fields into that what meets the local quality standards. So there are some other reasons, won't go too deep into detail, but I mean, this is an opportunity, as you mentioned, right? So another opportunity for those in the diaspora who work in oil and gas and who, you know, have that capability, understand, who've worked at refineries in the past. I have a friend who worked at a refinery in Los Angeles, as a matter of fact, you know, and there aren't too many people like us who work in that space. But that could be really a huge boom if the investment is made to bring in the tools required to refine locally.
Yeah.
Did you have another thought before I went to the next one?
No, that's it.
Okay, cool. So with that, to your point, yes, we would love the exploration of the MOU to Nigeria. However, that is an exploration discussion, and it is not in practice as of yet. But what is a crude oil delivery, or sorry, not a refined oil delivery coming from Russia. So there is a 160,000 DWT ship loading 500,000 barrels of Palenka oil, and it's supposed to, I guess it's supposed to arrive on the 25th of April, and that is coming to Tema. If I'm not
so it's on the way already.
It's on the way, yes. Let me just read from this article. So Ghana turns to Russian fuel as, so the number is actually 320,000, not 500,000. It is, it's increasingly relying on fuel sources, according to a report by Bloomberg. Oh, sorry. It is actually expected to arrive today, April 6th, 2026. Okay. So according to a report by Bloomberg, the vessel identified as Hellas Fighter loaded clean fuel products in Russia and is currently en route to Ghana's main hub, or was currently en route. It should probably have arrived today. To your point, and the point we've mentioned before, the development highlights Ghana's ability to cushion itself against global fuel supply disruptions linked to ongoing conflict, but it has to do so through relationships externally. Ghana has long depended on imported fuel due to limited domestic refining capacity. In 2023, Russia emerged as the country's second largest supplier of petroleum products, accounting for about 18% of mineral fuel imports, according to trade data. Despite this, the National Petroleum Authority insists the country does not depend on any single source. I did see a video earlier that I didn't add for us to watch, but President Muhammad did mention there's enough fuel reserves and enough fuel that even if this tanker did not arrive, there's enough for at least 2 months, if I'm not mistaken, of fuel. And don't quote me on that timeline, but he had mentioned there is enough for a period of time. The same conversations being had in Kenya and other countries where there are fuel shortages and challenges with getting fuel. So with that, we will move on to the next and final story, from oil to real estate. There is an Africa Real Estate Festival, the AREF, that is committed to driving growth, innovation, and investment in the African real estate sector. And that is coming later this month. So we will play a video and have some commentary on the other side.
Now, over 1.4 billion Africans are expected to live in cities by 2050.
We're not seeing it.
Yeah, sorry, I realized that I stretched the screen too soon. Technical difficulties. Here we go. Let's try that again. Apologies.
reigniting the conversation on sustainability, real estate and urban development. Government officials, policymakers, industry professionals, and other stakeholders have therefore assembled in Accra under the Africa Real Estate Festival 2026 to move Africa's real estate sector beyond transactions and towards long-term people-centered development. The founder and chief executive officer of the festival, Desmond Otin, described the festival as a necessary platform driven by the urgency of Africa's rapid urbanization.
On encouraging the continent to wake up and be ready for what's coming. Like I said in my presentation, in the year 2030, our transaction is going to be crossing about 2 trillion USD. And in 2050, about 1.4 billion of Africans will be living in cities. Now, we've had issues of affordability, sustainability, and how good the continent can be.
It's taking place April 18th and 19th. I know I had spoken to Desmond, the one who was in the video. I spoke to him briefly about the event. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be there for the first day, but I'll be able to attend on the second day of the Africa Real Estate Festival. I'll have my team cover some of this event that's happening. And I mean, Ghana continues to be a place that people are looking at for real estate. So I'm not surprised that such an event is happening. And this is the first, I believe, of this festival. So let's see how everything goes.
Yeah, I mean, it is a heavy duty festival from what I can see. Just like looking at, you know, the number of different people who've reported on it and how far in advance they've done it. I noticed that, you know, all the major you know, publications in Ghana have already been reporting on this from like the last 2 or 3 months. There's expected to be 1,500 people there, 30 exhibitors, and they're talking about a market value of $533.34 billion. And so this is going to be a huge event. It's going to be at the Palms, as you mentioned, and it's going to be on the 18th and 19th of April. You know, it's something that if you are in Ghana, we definitely recommend you go to. You know, this is one of those things that we had spoken about previously, right? If you're in country, this is where you need to be. These kinds of events, even if your goal is not today to get into real estate, you just never know who you can meet at an event like this. And it's just really important to network with folks who are of like mind and who are focused on, you know, advancement and development.
Yeah,
for sure.
Most definitely. Most definitely. I am, I'm currently not in Ghana at the moment. I know I said here a couple of times because I'm so used to being in Ghana, but I am out of the country right now. But I will be back in the country just in time, but I won't be there for the 18th. I will be at a different event on the 18th, but I will go to that festival on the 19th. So I'm looking forward to it. And as you said, networking is a great opportunity for anyone who's trying to connect with people in business, because you'll find that the real estate industry touches so many different areas that there's a lot of times people do want to connect with people in that industry. You might be, you know, in so many different kinds of businesses. So for example, one of my videos I did about a building that's selling in cantonments, I had somebody send me an email, talk about they want to get information on doing the CCTV systems, the security systems in people's homes and that kind of stuff. You know, although that's not the space I'm in. I market and promote for these some of the developers. That's something as an example of somebody who's in an industry that's related to real estate some way, somehow. But then it can also just be a great way to meet new people when you've just moved to the country, you're just trying to navigate the spaces. I think that it's a good place to be.
Absolutely, 100%. And, you know, look, you know, we talk about visiting, moving, and investing on the continent. And I will always say, and, you know, some people disagree, but I do think real estate is the best way to move forward. Here's why. A couple of things. There's a couple of different ways that you can invest in real estate in Africa differently than some other parts of the world, specifically the United States, where I'm currently. So when it comes to land banking, you can buy land, put up a fence, make sure you have a caretaker on the land. That's always what I recommend you do, regardless of what country you're in. build a fence. And by a fence, I mean a 10-foot cement wall. We call it fences in West Africa, but it's a 10-foot cement wall. So you wall your property and you have a caretaker on the property where you have them paying rent and you have a contract with them because so many people squat and try to take over your land. But all that done, that land's increase in value is tremendous. I think you had anecdotally told me about a family member who had bought land in East Legon. I remember this conversation. I think you and I had this conversation, Ivy, who had bought land in East Legon in the early aughts, 2000 something.
No, it's like the 90s.
Oh, it's the 90s. Okay. And then obviously it's worth so much more. And these are areas that, you might think like it doesn't make sense to buy land there now, but every city expands.
Yeah, it does. Because even, for example, an example I have is in 2012, I was in an area of Accra called Lakeside Estate. And then Ashale Botre is in that area as well. And back in that time, 2012, the homes were going for like $50,000 and now $50,000. And now I know that people have gotten homes in that same area for like 200,000, 300,000, so it does, it does increase in value. And then there's some people who've bought things in land in Boteman area, which is where they end up building the Boteman Sports Stadium. And now those areas are developing quickly. So it's like people bought land at least a decade ago, 15 years ago. And I know someone who bought land in what they call East Legon Hills, like, many years ago. And then now that area is high value. So, as the city expands, the areas around it are the ones that start developing, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you don't just buy the land and you want to build on the land, that's another source of income because, right, you can rent out a space on the land. What I did in one of my properties is I have a main building, which is going to be 2 stories, multifamily, and then I have a guest house, which is also going to be rented. These are ways that you can have residual income. And you can build the equity of the value by building on the property as well, right? So the land itself obviously is worth money, but if you build a income property, that also becomes worth money. And other people who are, entrepreneurial minded, who have that kind of a mindset, if you decide you want to give up that land, you want to sell it, you can sell it at a premium. And one thing we do know is with this Blaxit that's happening and people moving to the continent and, cities start to expand, that means that you as someone who owns land there now have land at a premium, right? So it really makes sense to look into that. And so this is where you go to hear all these kinds of ideas. I did not wake up one day with this thought process in mind. It was going to conferences like this, real estate conferences, talking to people who work in real estate, realtors, people who own property. And that's where I decided to do what I did on my site. I talked to someone who started with a guest house. They lived in that guest house while they built their main house. And they also had a house help quarters. I don't know what we want to call it now. They call it boys quarters. I just hate that name. But
I know, me too.
They had because of the implications, of course.
Yeah.
But they had a quarters for house help on site, and they had a separate guest house that they stayed in while they took them 15 years to build their house. A massive 5-story top floor duplex penthouse with like all the modern amenities. It took a long time to build, but that entire time they had somewhere to stay on property to watch what was happening. And then now that guest house is also a rental property. So you have 3 floors of rental properties. He has a 2-story duplex that he'll stay in. And then he also has a guest house on the side. So he has an additional place that he can rent out that he was staying in previously. And he also made sure it was up to par. So I'm doing the exact same thing. And that came from talking to someone who's done this before. And so that's why going to one of these conferences, something like this, is really, really important. Not only to hear what to do once you have the land, but also how to get the land, where land is, what the different use cases for that land can be, what companies are selling land. There's also potentials for employment. There are all kinds of different ways that you can benefit from going to a conference like this. So if you're in country, I definitely recommend you attend this conference. All right. So with that, we are a bit over time. Want to thank you all who participated in the live stream and who stuck with us to the end. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that thumbs up to let the algorithm know that you like the content. Make sure you share this with anybody you know who's thinking about coming to Ghana and wants to know about what's happening in the country. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to both of our channels. Subscribe to Ivy Prosper everywhere and follow her everywhere. Follow Authentic African everywhere. And also hit the hype. If you're watching on YouTube, you get 3 hypes per week. It's a new thing that they have. Make sure you hit that hype on either one of our videos if you're watching. That hype does a lot to help the help us out in the algorithms, because it's been a struggle these last couple of months. The algorithm has been not on my side. So we need your help to make sure that these videos get out to our subscribers and folks such as yourself who find this information important. Any final words before we go, Ivy?
Thank you so much for another engaging conversation, talking about the news in Ghana, relating it to how the diaspora can find it to be valuable and important. It's always important to know the news of what's happening in a country of interest. And for some of you who are thinking about relocating or simply doing business, it's always good to know what's happening on the ground, because it helps you make informed decisions on how you invest your money. Because the last thing you want is to invest in situations and not know about, certain situations that may be happening in the country. So it's very important that you understand the lay of the land. So I thank you for joining us again for one of our bi-weekly conversations about the news happening in Ghana.
Absolutely. So we'll see you guys again in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.